Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. Hope you guys are ready to talk true crime today because, wow, today's case, it's a wild one. All right, imagine this. Close your eyes for a minute and imagine that somebody goes missing. The police then find their abandoned car with a packed suitcase inside of it. And they learn that the person has sent their friends a bunch of text messages saying they just need to get away from it all. You might be tempted to think that the person disappeared on purpose, right? I mean, that's the story that the evidence seems to be telling. And even though today's case begins that way, it takes some really shocking twists and turns along the way that really, quite honestly, just go to prove that things aren't always what they seem. So guys, let's get into it. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I used to be so mentally checked out because of how tired I was. I would get home, all I would be focused on is getting to bed because I knew I wasn't going to get a good night of sleep, so I would end up skipping quality time with my husband, my kids, and it just made me miserable. Honestly, it really did. But now that I drink Beam Dream every night, not only am I getting amazing sleep, but it truly has changed my quality of life. One scoop of Beam Dream is clinically shown to help you fall asleep faster, sleep through the night, and wake up refreshed. It leaves you with zero grogginess compared to other supplements, and get this, it costs less than a cup of coffee. So luxury and sleep doesn't have to be expensive. Now, creating a custom flavor with them was such an honor for me because I believe in the product so much. We went through a very rigorous sampling process. I helped collaborate with them on the artwork for the bag. I mean, I really poured so much of myself into this because I truly love this product. And I wanted to make sure that it was absolutely perfect for all of you guys. And as it turns out, you guys have voted and you love it too. So much so that it completely sold out and there had to be another order placed just to have more bags because you love the flavor so much. And what I love is also how versatile it is because now that it's so warm outside, I don't need to be drinking it warm. I can, but I also love pouring it over ice because it tastes just like this crisp, refreshing chocolate milk almost. It is so good. But I've already told you before, it is my sweet treat before bed and it is only 15 calories, 0 added grams of sugar. I mean, it is guilt-free but tastes so good. Now you can try it and just do a one-off, but if you subscribe, you will save 20% off every single month, plus you'll get a free frother with your order. You also can pause or cancel at any time. I mean, it is a super sweet deal. And now to celebrate my partnership with Beam, we are doing a giveaway, but only for 48 hours. If you make a purchase using my link or my discount code 10TOLIFE, you'll get up to 40% off, but that's not all. You'll also automatically be entered into a chance to win a year's worth of Dream for free. 12 bags, over $1,000 value, a full year of Beam Dream. One Dream product per month is redeemable, and the winner will be chosen at complete random and will be notified 48 hours after the giveaway by email. So go, enter, also get your 40% off, and let me know what you guys think. 33-year-old Carmen Thomas was living her absolute best life in Australia in 2010, but it took her a long journey to get there. She was born in South Africa in October 1977, and she was a very tiny baby but had this very big personality, and it really only got bigger as she got older. Her mom, Teresa, was a single mother, and Carmen was a lot to deal with, but in a good way. Carmen was loud, outgoing, she loved having all the attention on her, she loved putting on a show, she would dance and sing just constantly. She also enjoyed modeling and posing for pictures. I mean, truly, she was like a little princess, like the epitome of it. Now, when she was 3, Carmen and Teresa moved to New Zealand, and it was around this time that Teresa married a man named Neville, and he eventually adopted Carmen. But unfortunately, when Carmen was just 10 years old, he passed away, and that really hit Carmen hard. She had been very close with Neville, and she had a very hard time dealing with his death. Now, Carmen, who was usually this very happy, bubbly kid, she turned into the exact opposite. She was now withdrawn, sad, and just not her normal self. Her mother hated seeing how upset she was, so she decided that they needed a change of scenery. So they moved to Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. They had a lot of extended family nearby, so it made them feel way less alone. Now, the move was a great change of pace for Carmen. She slowly started going back to her old happy-go-lucky self. She quickly made lots of friends, and Carmen basically became kind of like the queen bee of her friend group. Whatever she wanted to do, they would do. Carmen wasn't afraid of anything either, and like most teenagers, she did get into a bit of trouble. She liked to party, sneak out at night, and just have a good time. And while this behavior often upset her mom and even her friends' parents, Carmen just didn't really care. When Carmen was in secondary school, which is like high school, her mom wanted to move back to South Africa. But Carmen was almost ready to graduate, and all of her best friends were in the UK, so she didn't want to move and start over all over again. So Carmen convinced her mom to let her stay at home, while her mom moved back to South Africa, alone. Carmen stuck around with her friends, family, and was pretty much just couch surfing at the time, staying with whoever would take her in for the night. And then after she graduated, Carmen bounced from town to town for a few years. And she was kind of taking advantage of being young and having almost no responsibilities. And so eventually she moved to Southampton to go to college. Then in 2000, when Carmen was just 23 years old, she was diagnosed with bowel cancer. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, it was a really scary time for her, especially being so young. And for the time being, she had to pause school while she got chemotherapy. Thankfully, the treatment worked, and she went into remission around 2001 or 2002. And after she recovered, she went back to college, and she graduated with a degree in marketing. And that's when Carmen moved to London, which had been a dream of hers for years. It was like she was made for the city. She was so upbeat, energetic, that this busy city life really fit her personality. London has a great nightlife, and that was a huge plus for Carmen. Now keep in mind, Carmen could charm her way into just about any situation. She was beautiful, and she really used that to her advantage. She could get men to do almost anything for her. Like, for example, say they went to a club, but there was a long line out front. Carmen would somehow convince security to just let them in ahead of everybody else. Then, once they were inside, she would find a way to get them free access to the VIP area. Then, once there, getting them all free drinks, things like that. People were just naturally drawn to her. This included a man named Brad Callaghan. Now, Brad was just 1 year older than Carmen, and he was from New Zealand and an engineer. He graduated from college in 2001 and lived in Australia for a little while before moving to the UK. Sometime around 2003, Carmen was having another night out when she met Brad. And he was pretty similar to her in the fact that, people were just drawn to him. Everybody described him as this genuinely good guy who really liked to have fun. And because of that, naturally, they were both just, immediately drawn to one another, like a magnet. Carmen was absolutely beautiful. She was striking, and she was one of the few people who looked great either as a blonde or a brunette. She had this big smile, round rosy cheeks, a petite build, these dark little captivating, alluring eyes. And Brad kind of had the tall, dark, and handsome thing going on. So they began dating, and their relationship moved very fast. Too fast. Carmen had moved into Brad's South London apartment just within a few months. Now the problem was their relationship was also constantly on again, off again, and this went on for a while. Some of Carmen's friends said that the relationship was volatile, but they never explained why. To others, it just seemed like Carmen and Brad had rushed into a relationship when really they were just better off as friends. But then in 2004, Carmen found out that she was pregnant. This was a big wake-up call to both Brad and Carmen, and they took this as a sign that it was time to fix their relationship. They needed to fix their problems, create a more stable environment for the baby. Carmen had grown up with a single parent, and Brad's parents had divorced when they were young, so they knew what it was like to live in a broken family, and they didn't want their baby to go through the same thing. So they were working on their relationship, and then in March of 2005, Carmen gave birth to a son, and they named him Jack. She and Brad were very dedicated parents. Their lives revolved around Jack. But for whatever reason, they still just couldn't make the relationship work. They really wanted to be a good example of how a marriage could succeed, but they realized that they weren't doing that by being together because they were constantly fighting. And they didn't want Jack to grow up thinking that that's what love was like. So they figured that it would be better for Jack to have parents who were separated but happy instead of parents who were together but fighting all the time. So because of that, Brad and Carmen broke up. Now, they were still going to co-parent together. Like I said, they were both dedicated to Jack, and they were willing to put their personal feelings about each other aside for him. And it turned out that this worked really well. Brad and Carmen were great at co-parenting. Their lives were so much more peaceful after they made this decision to separate too, that it just made it a pleasant environment. But soon after Jack was born, Brad moved back to New Zealand for work, and Carmen really wanted Jack to have both parents in his life. So then in 2008, Carmen decided to move to New Zealand to be closer to him. They lived in the Auckland area, and Brad and Carmen actually got homes in the same neighborhood, only about 1.5 miles from one another. It was a very nice area with great schools, which was especially important for Brad and Carmen because Jack was going to be getting to that age pretty soon. Brad started dating somebody new, and this new person that he was dating ended up becoming pregnant in 2010. Carmen was actually really excited about it. She thought that it was going to be great for Jack to have a sibling. Carmen even met Brad's new partner, and she loved her. So to Carmen's friend, the situation was almost too perfect. Most of the time you hear stories about ex-partners not getting along, and then when you throw new partners into the mix, there's jealousy, things seem to get worse, it gets messy. But that was the complete opposite of Brad and Carmen's situation. It really was the ideal example of a mutual breakup where the former boyfriend and girlfriend, they did manage to be friends afterward. So on June 29th, 2010, Carmen and Brad met up to talk about an issue at Jack's school. Like always, everything apparently went smoothly. They were very cooperative with one another. And then afterward, Jack went home with Brad because it was his turn to have custody for the week. But when it was time for Jack to go back to Carmen, Brad tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. She also didn't call him back. And the same thing happened when he was texting her. Brad even went over to her apartment to see if everything was okay, but he found that she wasn't there, and neither was her car. He asked around, and he found out that her friends hadn't seen her either. Her neighbors, they hadn't seen her too. So Brad was now getting a bit worried. So on July 13th, Brad called 111, which in New Zealand is equivalent to 911.
Good afternoon, Police Communication.
Yes, hi. It's Brett Cohen speaking. Carmen Thomas, she was due back yesterday to pick up her son, and she never turned up. I've been trying to ring her all week and haven't been able to get hold of her.
Okay, what relationship are you to her?
We have a son together.
Okay, so an ex-partner or?
Yeah, ex-partner, yeah.
Now, thankfully, the police took Carmen's disappearance very seriously right away. They started looking for her immediately. Brad had mentioned that Carmen's car was missing, and it didn't take the detectives very long to learn that just a few days before, Carmen's car had been found abandoned. It was in Hamilton, which is a city that's about an hour and a half away from Auckland. Now, someone who lived there had seen the car on the street, thought something was super off about it, so that's why they called it in. It was actually in a residential area, so they had never even seen that car before. So they had reported the car to the police and eventually had it towed out of the area. Now, the police recovered the car and they brought it back on July 13th, the same day that Carmen was reported as missing. So like I said, they really wasted no time at all trying to find her. They searched the car, which was pretty messy, and oddly enough, a packed suitcase was found in her back seat. It was full of clothing. Nothing too unusual, but still strange. It wasn't like Carmen often kept a packed suitcase just in her car. But then they also found 2 envelopes in the glove compartment. One had a note on it, which was addressed to Carmen and talked about how she owed a debt to somebody. And then the other envelope was addressed to a Misty, and it had the phrase, "Thanks, hun," written on the front, and it had cash inside. So investigators asked Brad about these items. Who was Misty, and why did Carmen owe money to somebody? So Brad let them know that Carmen used to work in a club over in East Auckland as an escort, but he was under the impression that Carmen had quit doing that after Brad had said that it was a bad example for their son. But Brad did say that Misty was one of the names that Carmen used to go by, and Carmen's manager at the club also confirmed the fact that Carmen also went by the name Misty. So then, right then and there, the detectives thought that they had a pretty good idea of what had happened. Working as an escort, it can be incredibly dangerous, and they figured that Carmen must have had a bad experience with a client. Unfortunately, this also wasn't uncommon, and the notes left in Carmen's car really seemed to support that theory. Of course, they couldn't prove that that's what had happened, though, until they found Carmen's body. So they started searching the area where her car was found, and they asked if anybody had seen her, but nobody came forward. And nobody had noticed that anything was out of the ordinary. So the police then turned their attention and their investigation to Carmen's apartment. They figured that it would probably provide some more information about where Carmen had gone, who she had been with. Now, at first, everything in her place seemed somewhat normal, except for the fact that her outdoor trash can was missing. And the closer that the investigators looked, the more that they found and the less normal things seemed to be. First, all of Carmen's personal items that she would carry with her day to day were gone. Her keys, wallet, cell phone, purse, all gone. But that wasn't the most concerning thing the investigators discovered. There were also little drops of blood found throughout Carmen's apartment. There was nothing in the bedroom or the main living room area, but in the bathroom there were small spots of blood. They were found in the sink and also in the shower. And the pattern of the blood spatter in the shower was very weird. It was like someone had held something bloody underneath the water stream. So when the water hit it, the blood then splashed upward and kind of fanned out all along the wall. They even found more blood in Carmen's kitchen. This time it was at the very bottom of her washing machine, which was in the kitchen. The blood droplets were very small and very fine, and the expert said that it actually looked like something had been hit with great force in order to get them to spray out the way that they had. Similar droplets were also found on a door near the kitchen. Then, the investigators sprayed luminol in the apartment, wanting to show them any areas where somebody might have tried to clean up the blood. And in the bathroom, there were multiple smears. And in the dining area, there were blood droplets all over a rug, which what looked like bloody footprints. I mean, it painted a gruesome scene. Investigators expected to find blood smears in the kitchen, where they had already found those droplets, but there was nothing. However, they did find a very strange oily residue on the floor, and they figured that this might have been preventing the luminol from working properly. So they swabbed some samples of this oily residue for forensic testing, and they took also the blood that was found in the kitchen and the bathroom. They sent all of this stuff to the lab too, and everything too that they had found in Carmen's car, like the notes in the suitcase. They needed to figure out what all of this meant. What was all of this? And while they were waiting for the results, they got to questioning Carmen's friends and family. They discovered that Carmen had been in contact with some friends by text message in early July, but nobody had actually seen her since late June. In those last couple of text messages that she sent, Carmen told her friends that she just needed a break. She was going to go out to Hamilton for a little while. Carmen even texted her manager at the escort agency that she would be gone for a few days. So it kind of seemed to explain why Carmen's car was in Hamilton and why she had packed a suitcase, right? But her friends disagreed with that theory. Carmen would never just get up and leave like that. Plus, before she texted her friends, she made no mention of wanting to go on a solo vacation. It was all extremely sudden. Plus, she definitely would not just leave her son. Also, some of Carmen's messages, they seemed weird. The people who texted with Carmen regularly knew the kinds of words that she used, the kinds of phrases that she used. And these texts, they just did not sound like her. She never really used abbreviations or spelled words wrong, but this last set of text messages, not only did it have typos, but it had more abbreviations. Plus, if Carmen was so upset about something that she had to leave town for a few days, she probably would have told her friends what was going on, her close friends at least. But they said that Carmen had never mentioned anything bad happening in her life at all. Now, as if all of that wasn't suspicious enough, within just a few days of her disappearance, the results from the forensic testing came back. The investigators had discovered that all of the blood in Carmen's apartment was a match to her. However, they hadn't been able to figure out what that oily residue on Carmen's kitchen floor was. They tried comparing the stuff to hundreds of other substances in their system, but nothing was a match. Additionally, they found that Carmen's blood was also in the car and in the suitcase. On top of that, the notes that were found in her car were also tested for DNA. Carmen's DNA was on both notes, but there was also the DNA of an unknown person. But that unknown person hadn't left very much behind. I mean, there wasn't enough material for the labs to even test it and figure out who it came from. It seemed like somebody had been very, very careful not to leave any evidence when they were writing these notes. Maybe they even wore gloves. Still, it was enough for the police to treat Carmen's disappearance as a homicide. Without that other person's DNA, it might have been possible for her to have gone missing on purpose or even in an accident. Even with all the blood in the kitchen and the shower, it could have been from Carmen maybe cutting herself, chopping vegetables, or getting a nosebleed. But even though the police didn't know whose DNA was on that envelope, they now knew that somebody else was involved. So they searched for CCTV footage around the area in both Auckland and Hamilton, and even the surrounding areas. They wanted to try and figure out where Carmen was last seen, and they focused a lot of their efforts on the bars in Hamilton. But they didn't find her in the bars. They found her on CCTV footage at a pharmacy, close to her home, and she was acting completely normal. She just bought something and then left. Then the next day on June 28th, she showed up on a different security camera at a grocery store. In that footage, Carmen was wearing a blue scarf and again, acting totally normal. Nothing seemed off. She bought some stuff, and that purchase ended up being the last activity that appeared on her bank before she just disappeared. So by now, it was pretty close to July 16th, which was the day that they put out the missing persons alert. Even though the police were trying to be open with the public, they didn't want to say too much, especially if it might interfere with the investigation. So they didn't say that they were treating Carmen's disappearance as a possible murder yet. But they did tell the public to be on the lookout for all of the items that were missing from Carmen's house, her keys, her wallet, her purse, and even that missing trash can. Carmen's mom, Teresa, meanwhile, flew from South Africa to New Zealand to appear in a press conference. She was pleading for Carmen to come back home. She said that she hoped that Carmen would come home safe, but at this point, even Teresa didn't know that investigators were treating Carmen's disappearance as a homicide. Of course, a lot of people immediately thought that Carmen's ex-boyfriend, Brad, was definitely worth looking at or talking to. This was even after the police assured the public that Brad had been cooperating with them the entire time. However, their opinions about Brad began to change when Carmen's landlady came forward with some very important and strange information. She said that on the morning of June 29th, she was sitting in her own apartment when she heard a loud argument coming from Carmen's unit. The shouting went on for a few minutes before she heard a female voice scream. And then that scream was followed by a whimpering noise. Then she heard a male voice saying, "Shh, shh," as if somebody was telling them to be quiet. The landlady just stood still, hoping to hear more voices, but she didn't hear anything else, and that made her feel super worried. She went to go knock on Carmen's door to make sure that she was okay, but nobody answered, so she decided to look in the front window. Everything looked fairly normal. There was a garbage can and a laundry hamper that had been knocked over, but it didn't seem that weird, and since nothing else seemed out of the ordinary, she just went back to her apartment. A little while later, she saw Brad, though, standing in the driveway. And it was really strange because he was only wearing his boxers and a t-shirt. He was holding his jeans and his shoes, and he looked like he had just gotten out of the shower. Now, of course, it was strange for him to be standing outside in his underwear, but what's even weirder is that Brad's shirt had blood all over it. So the landlady went outside and asked Brad what happened, and Brad said that Carmen had texted him that morning and said that she wasn't feeling well. Even though she hadn't had cancer for a long time, she still went through these periods where she felt extremely sick, and he thought that maybe this was one of those times. So Brad said he went over to help Carmen, and she threw up all over him. Again, because of her past experience with cancer, her throw-up often had blood in it, and he says that's how his shirt ended up stained with blood on it. But Brad said that Carmen was fine now. She was inside, she was taking a nap, she was resting. The landlady then asked if she should go check on Carmen later, but Brad insisted that she was okay. She just shouldn't go over there because Carmen now needed to rest. So the landlady went back to her apartment, but she felt something was off. She wasn't really happy about it. So she texted Carmen later that day, asking her if she was okay. And Carmen texted her back. She said, "Yeah, I've been really sick this week. I went to the hospital for a bit. Heading down south for a week off. We'll be back Sun," short for Sunday. The landlady, though, never saw or heard Carmen leave. She didn't think much about it, though, but as time went on and as Carmen was declared as missing, she started to really question this entire interaction and whether it was as innocent as Brad had made it out to be. Needless to say, this whole story made Brad suspect number one, even though he was still complying with everything that the police had asked him to do. He provided them with a DNA sample, gave them access to his phone, his bank records, and while police didn't physically have Carmen's phone, they did manage to contact her phone company and they got access to her information that way. They found that beginning in late July, Carmen and Brad's phone were always near each other, like someone was maybe keeping them in the same room together. Because before that, at the beginning of July, they had been texting back and forth a whole bunch, but a bunch of those messages were from when Carmen and Brad were in the exact same place, like they were just sitting in the room together, texting instead of talking. The activity on Carmen's phone also was weird. She sent a lot of texts and calls, but recently she had been in contact with people way less. She went from sending tons of text messages a day to just a few a week. And on top of that, the way that she was writing, it changed. I mentioned this before, but she was now using abbreviations, spelling words wrong and differently, things that she had never done in the past, never had done that before. For example, Carmen used the word hun a lot, specifically spelled H-O-N. But then suddenly after she disappeared, she started spelling it H-U-N. And she started shortening words that she didn't usually shorten. In one text, she wrote HOSP, H-O-S-P. That was short for hospital, which was not a normal texting pattern for her. However, it was something that Brad wrote a lot. They also found that Brad had been driving all around Auckland late at night regularly, ever since Carmen's disappearance. He was driving to places he never had been before, which was just super, super strange. The problem was, all of the evidence that the police had was just circumstantial. That was it. Now, at this point, they knew that it was unlikely that Carmen was going to be found alive. So if they wanted to make an arrest, they either needed to find a smoking gun or they needed to find Carmen's actual body. So they sent search crews and cadaver dogs all around the area, but they hadn't found anything yet. They went through all of that CCTV footage again, and when they did, they found that on June 28th, Brad was at a local grocery store. Now, first, it was weird that Brad was there in the middle of the day because normally he would be at work. And second, his behavior on the tape, it was a little strange. He was with a friend, but they barely said anything to each other. Brad just stood still with this totally blank stare across his face with his arms tightly crossed in front of him. His head was down the entire time, and something just seemed off. And his purchases? He bought trash bags and cleaning supplies. So by mid-August, the police felt good enough about the evidence that they did have that they were going to make a formal announcement to the public. They thought that Carmen had been murdered. They closed off a bunch of streets all throughout Auckland so that they could search all along the sides of the roads. They stopped hundreds of drivers asking them if they had ever seen Carmen, but nothing led to anything concrete. And Brad was still acting like he was innocent. He even went on TV and talked about how much his son missed his mom. But at least one of the tipsters was not buying it. See, Brad was an engineer and he worked in construction. And when he had to work, Brad normally arrived at construction sites between 8 and 10 a.m. And he never showed up super early like the actual construction crew had to. But one of his coworkers, a member of one of those crews, came forward to the police and said that one day he and everybody else got to work around 4 or 5 a.m. and Brad suddenly came out of nowhere. He wasn't in his normal work clothing, he wasn't wearing any safety equipment, and it was just strange for him to be there that early. And coincidentally, this was the same day that they were supposed to be pouring concrete for the foundation for the building that they were working on. There were supposed to be a bunch of steel rods in the concrete, but one of those rods was way too long, almost like they hadn't put it in deep enough in the concrete because there was something in the way. So when they brought this up to Brad, the structural engineer, he just said ignore it and move on. Except this wasn't something that they could ignore, because it could majorly affect the building's structural integrity. And it was Brad's whole job to make sure things like that didn't happen. Again, he was the structural engineer. So it was super weird for him to just ignore a problem like that. On top of that, they found a trash can that had a very bad smell coming from it. It was near an area where the construction workers had lunch, and it was so bad that they had to move. So at one point, they opened the bin to see what was inside, and they just saw a bunch of bags. They left it, and then eventually the smell disappeared, but the trash can apparently turned up again at the beginning of September. A neighbor who lived 2 doors down from Brad said that they found a trash can in their yard that wasn't theirs. The police went to go pick it up, and they tried to figure out whose it was. All the trash can numbers in Auckland had a number on the side, and the number was linked to whoever owned the can. But the numbers on the side of this trash can, they had been completely scratched off. But this didn't prevent investigators from determining who owned it, because whenever something is printed on plastic, it leaves a permanent mark, whether you see it or not. So basically, if you use heat, this type of plastic can return to its original shape, even if it looks like it has been ruined, mutilated, damaged, destroyed. So the investigators took a light that was used for photography, they put it close to that scratched area of the trash can, and the light got hot, and that plastic heated right up. And those original numbers, they all came back to the surface. So investigators looked up the code and they learned that the trash can belonged to Carmen Thomas. So now there was a pretty clear line connecting Carmen to those reports about that smelly trash can at the worksite. Also to Brad's strange behavior. I mean, it wasn't proof. Brad still could have been acting weird for some other reason. And the can that the workers thought was smelly wasn't necessarily the same one that turned up in the neighbor's yard. But it wasn't looking good. So to find out for sure what was going on here, on September 20th, a team went to search the worksite. They focused on that area where the worker had said that long steel pole couldn't go all the way into the concrete. They had to dig through the fairly fresh concrete to see what was down there in order to figure it out. And I'm sure you're all thinking this too, but the investigators were convinced that they were going to find Carmen's body in that hole. But after they broke up the concrete, they stuck a camera down the hole. And they found absolutely nothing. Everybody had been hoping that this would be a huge break in the case, but instead, they weren't any closer to a solution than when before they had even gotten this tip. Except that's about the time that one of Brad's friends, whose name has not been released to the public, came forward with another clue. He said that on July 2nd, Brad had asked him if he wanted to go boating the next morning. The friend said yes. I mean, he was already planning on going out on his boat anyway. But something about this request apparently just seemed a little odd, because Brad was acting extremely grim, very serious, not like he wanted to go have a fun day on the water with his friend. Brad also insisted that they leave super early in the morning, like at 5 a.m. But the friend was like, no, that is way too early. So they agreed to just meet at the marina around 9 a.m. When they met the next morning, Brad apparently looked terrible. He looked like he hadn't slept or showered in days. And when the friend asked Brad if Brad was okay, he said, "No, I'm in big trouble. I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't have to, but I really need your help." Then, to his friend's just utter horror, Brad confessed he killed Carmen. Now, initially, this friend kind of just laughed it off, like Brad was making some sort of sick joke, but then he realized that Brad was being completely serious. Brad said that he had been driving around all week trying to find somewhere to hide the body. That's why all that data on his cell phone showed that he had been going to random places late at night, unusual spots. He hadn't been able to find the right place, though. So that's why now he was asking his friend to help him dump her body in the ocean. So Brad then opened up the trunk to his car and he showed his friend multiple plastic bins that were filled with concrete. Brad said that he had cut Carmen's body up and that he put the pieces of her body in those bins and then filled them with cement. He wanted to go out to the middle of the ocean and just dump the bins there. So this was about the moment that the friend really started freaking out, especially because the marina was really busy and anybody could see what they were doing. So he asked Brad to go for a drive so that they could have a private talk, and Brad agreed to this. During the drive, the friend started telling Brad all of the ways that his plan could go wrong. The concrete bins might not sink, they might float to the surface, a diver might find them, somebody else could see them dumping them, and so on. But Brad was determined to make it work. So they drove back to the marina, they put the buckets on the boat, and they headed out to the water. But the friend couldn't do it. He said he didn't want to be any part of this. So they turned the boat back around and they went back to the dock. Now at that point, the marina was way too busy to put the bins back into Brad's trunk. So they awkwardly just stood around and kind of smoked a cigarette together, not saying much. When the traffic in the area died down, they loaded the bins back into Brad's car. Then Brad gave his friend a burner phone and said that he should only communicate with him using that going forward. Then Brad got in his car and he took off. And then later that night, Brad called this friend on the burner phone because he was still trying to convince this guy to help him dump Carmen's body. But the answer was still no. The friend went on vacation a few days later, and when he got back, he hung out with Brad again. For what reason, I will never know. But this time, Brad didn't say anything about Carmen, even though pretty much everybody at this point in New Zealand knew that she was missing. Later on, though, Brad told him that if the police were to ask, to say that they had just gone out fishing that day. Nothing out of the ordinary. Which honestly, that is so ridiculous that this friend who wasn't willing to cooperate, which thank God, but why not go to the police right away? Why go on vacation like nothing happened? Why not go to the police right away when you find out this information? And this wasn't the only friend who Brad went to in order to ask for help. A totally different person said that Brad had suddenly showed up at his house one time and was just freaking out. He was shaking, he was rambling about how he had killed Carmen, how he needed to bury her body. And he begged his friend to help him, but this friend too refused and Brad left. But why are none of these friends calling the cops? Make it make sense. I don't understand. And remember how Brad was seen on that grocery store CCTV with another friend? Well, that friend also came forward. He said that Brad had admitted to him that he killed Carmen and that he texted him to meet him at the grocery store. He ended the conversation by saying, quote, "Can you please bring 3 black rubbish bags and a bottle of kerosene? Keep it quiet." So he met Brad at the grocery store, but forgot to bring the garbage bags, so they bought some, along with that cleaning supplies. Then they went back and cleaned Carmen's apartment together. Then yet another friend, count them, how many friends do we got now? Another friend came forward and said that Brad had tried to convince him to tell the police that he had seen Carmen around July 1st. That's a ton of people who were keeping this huge secret, right? I mean, it was just tip after tip after tip, all coming in at once after a months-long investigation into Carmen's disappearance. And I do not understand why everybody sat on this information for so long, or what just suddenly changed to now make them all speak up now. It just wasn't making sense. It's very bizarre. But it was enough for the detectives to arrest Brad, even though they still hadn't found Carmen's body. And this was now on September 21st. The arrest truly shocked a bunch of Carmen and Brad's friends. Clearly not everyone, since it sounds like Brad was blabbing about what he had done to a ton of people, but there were also lots of people who had never even suspected Brad at all, not even in the slightest. He always came across as a genuinely good guy, and even after they broke up, he and Carmen had seemed like they had such a good, healthy relationship with each other. Things looked like they were good between them. He had no motive. It didn't make sense. The police were trying to figure all of that out too, so after they arrested Brad, they searched his home. They found a receipt from the grocery store for the same day that he and that friend showed up on that security footage. And the receipt showed that he bought Scotch-Brite pads, cleaner, multiple size trash bags, and a few other random items like a celebrity magazine and vitamins. So it makes me wonder if Brad bought all of those extra things to maybe make him look a little less suspicious. They also found out that on June 30th, Brad bought a meat cleaver and a large plastic bin, the kind that you might store sweaters in or holiday decorations in. And the police also learned that Brad didn't just have one phone, he had two. And that was very helpful in determining a timeline of Carmen's murder and when her body and her car ended up being dumped. Now, as a reminder, Carmen was killed in Auckland, but her car was found in Hamilton. So the detectives figured that Brad must have left her car in Hamilton after the murder to try to throw people off the trail, but his main phone didn't show him driving there. His second phone, though, the one that the police had just learned about, it did show him. It showed that he was in Hamilton on July 5th, right around the time that they found Carmen's abandoned car. After he parked it, Brad called a friend from that same burner phone to come and pick him up. But the biggest clues were the ones that were found in Brad's car. First, the original carpet from the trunk was missing. Somewhere along the way, he had gotten a regular house carpet and he cut it up to fit the shape of his trunk. And when they removed the carpet, they found that Brad had repainted a bunch of different areas in his trunk with black paint, like he was definitely trying to cover something up. His car also smelled really bad, like a mixture of decay and artificial air freshener. When investigators ripped out the back seat, they found that the interior cushion was completely stained with blood. They also found 2 marks on Brad's back windshield. They looked like they matched the wheels from Carmen's trash can. And sure enough, they put the trash can in Brad's car with the wheels facing back, and everything lined up perfectly. The wheels were exactly in line with where those marks were on the back window of his car. Luminol also showed that blood had been all over the inside of Carmen's trash can. So the police swabbed the trash can and tested Brad's bloody car seat to find that both tested positive for Carmen's DNA. So now it was pretty clear what had happened. Brad had killed Carmen. He put her body in that trash can and then put the trash can in his car. The lid of the trash can probably opened up while he was driving, and the blood because of that spilled all over the trunk and the back seat. Then, Brad dumped Carmen's body somewhere. He cleaned his car and he used air freshener to try and mask the awful smell. The police even found a can of air freshener in the floorboard of his front seat. And I can't help but think about how Brad and Carmen's son, Jack, had been sitting in this car while they were searching for his mom. The entire time, he was on a cushion that was filled with his mom's blood. Brad said he cared about Jack, but that is just foul and disgusting. And remember when I said that Carmen had been texting friends in early July, but something seemed off about them? Well, investigators looked at Brad's text messages and they found that he texted in a very similar way, similar to all the messages that were sent from Carmen's phone. He spelled things the same way, shortened the same words in a lot of the same way. I mean, it was almost like a carbon copy. Plus, remember that note that was found in Carmen's car that said, "Misty, thanks, hun"? Well, it turns out that the writing on that envelope matched Brad's handwriting. And remember, there was one other clue on it. Remember that Carmen usually spelled the word hun as H-O-N? In early July, her text messages were spelling it like H-U-N. And that's also the way that that word was written on the envelope, and the way that Brad spelled that word. So it was one more piece of evidence that Brad wrote that letter to Misty. On his personal computer, it was also a treasure trove. Brad had searched thousands, literally thousands of searches relating to blood, murder, disposing of a dead body, how to commit the perfect crime, how to clean blood. The list just goes on and on and on. And those searches weren't just from around the time that Carmen went missing. They went back to over a year before. Like Brad had been planning Carmen's murder for that long. But still, nobody knew why. Everything about their life seemed fine. It seemed pretty okay from the outside, even according to their close family and friends. So was Brad just a completely different person in private? Or had they been in some kind of fight that took a violent turn? If the police were hoping that Brad would help make sense of it all, they were out of luck. After his arrest, he refused to say anything useful. He still denied having any involvement in Carmen's disappearance as well. But then on September 27th, Brad's lawyer told the police where Carmen's body could be found, even though Brad was still maintaining his innocence, which is a little bit confusing because how can you claim to be innocent, but you know where Carmen's body was buried? But that's what Brad did. He didn't try to explain how he knew where Carmen's body was or try to blame somebody else in all of this, but he directed them. The statement his lawyer gave the police basically said, "You can find Carmen's body here." And that was it. Now, I don't know how he expected to maintain his innocence after that. It's a bit of a strange tactic, if you ask me, but all right, to each their own. So based on that tip, the investigators went out to an area in the woods in West Auckland, and it was an area called Waitakere Ranges. When the police got there, it was fairly obvious where Carmen was buried. There were multiple shallow graves in the area. In each one, the detectives dug up a plastic bin. One of the bins was very large, and it had Carmen's torso in it, while the rest of the bins were smaller. Her arms and legs had all been cut in half and put into those smaller bins, and her head was placed in a smaller one as well, and each bin had been filled with concrete. A hearse arrived at the scene, and Carmen's remains were removed, and as the car was leaving, everybody who was there just stood at the side of the road with their heads down, just in respect for her. And then her body was sent to the medical examiner for an official autopsy. And it was finally enough for them to charge Brad with murder and with perverting the course of justice. That second charge was because he actively tried to mess up the investigation by getting rid of Carmen's body, asking his friends to lie to the police, and trying to cover up all of the evidence. So by May 2011, Brad was still in jail, but he was still saying that he was innocent. 2 months later, in July, the results from Carmen's autopsy were released. The medical examiner had determined that Carmen had died from blunt force trauma. She had been hit in the head 8 times. Then in November 2011, the police finally got their answers about his motive. Brad changed his not guilty plea to guilty, and he admitted to killing Carmen, and he explained why he did it. He said that on June 29th, he went to Carmen's apartment to talk about the issues that Jack was having in school. Carmen said that Jack was being bullied and that he needed to change schools, but Brad said that wasn't happening. He said he had been in contact with Jack's teacher, and she said that nothing was going on. But Carmen didn't change her stance. She insisted that Jack needed to change schools. Brad thought that she was overreacting to nothing, and he didn't like the idea of making such a big change when he didn't believe that there was even a problem. So neither one of them apparently was willing to budge or listen to the other, and the argument got heated. And then apparently during the argument, at one point, Carmen told Brad, "It doesn't matter what you think, because you're not Jack's father anyway." When Jack heard this, he snapped. He grabbed the closest thing to him, which was Jack's Little League baseball bat, and it was lying on the floor, and he just started hitting Carmen in the head, over and over again. And then when he realized she was dead, he freaked out, and he tried to cover up his crime. But there are still huge holes in Brad's story. Is that what really happened? We know that he was Googling some pretty gruesome things way before Carmen's death. So did he suddenly snap like he said? Or was this something that he was planning for a long time? Did he make this story up to prevent himself from being charged with premeditated murder? I mean, unfortunately, we will never know unless Brad comes forward with more information in the future. Nevertheless, between June 29th and July 13th, Brad went to the store, bought cleaning supplies, cleaned Carmen's apartment, and then tried to get his friends to help him dispose of her body. He packed a suitcase, put it in her car, making it look like she was going on a trip. Then he dumped her car in Hamilton and buried her body in the forest. Then officially reported her missing on July 13th, once he finally felt like he had gotten rid of all of the evidence that connected him to her death. All the while, he was still sending text messages from Carmen's phone to her friends, her family, acting like she was still alive. After June 29th, Brad would also text Carmen a bunch of times, saying things like, "Where are you? Can you please call? Jack wants to talk to you. I also want confirmation of Sunday. Hope you're better," things like that. Which obviously at this point, we know that Brad knew 100% where Carmen was, but he was just trying to hide his tracks. I'm sure he thought he actually would get away with it for a while too, but luckily, he didn't. Brad's sentencing hearing was a few months after he gave his confession, in March of 2012, and he received 6 years in prison for perverting the course of justice. But for Carmen's murder, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 13 years. Now, a lot of people were shocked by this. He murdered someone and he'd be up for parole in 13 years? But the judge said that Brad had shown genuine remorse and that he was a smart man who had a bright future ahead of him. Which, hi, not for nothing, who cares if he's smart? Who cares if he has a bright future? He took the future away of another person. Also, there's not arguing that he's smart or bright. He tried to cover up a murder in a very calculating way. Of course he's smart. Well, not smart enough, thank God, but like, what are you talking about? Now, Carmen's family has remained relatively quiet while they've been mourning her loss. Her son Jack is now living with Carmen's family in a very rural town using a different name. They want him to try to live as normal of a life as possible after now losing both of his parents. Now, get this, the friends who helped Brad, or didn't help him but kind of didn't say anything, they didn't receive any sort of punishment whatsoever. Because before Brad pleaded guilty, they each made a deal and agreed to testify against him. But I still can't shake the idea that there was more to Brad than meets the eye. I mean, he was searching things about murder, about blood, months before Carmen even died. Then he went to such incredible lengths to try to cover his steps, like creating those fake notes to make police think that Carmen was killed because she was still working as an escort, that she fled the suitcase. So what do you guys think? Did Brad just snap and have a bad moment? Or do you think that there's more that we don't know about? I'm interested to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for hearing Carmen's story today. I hope that Brad is locked up and does not get parole because I believe he is a monster, but let me know what you think. All right, guys, thanks again, and until the next one, stay safe.